Imagine how crazy it would be to go into a coma and travel to the year 3906. Sounds like something out of a movie, right?
Not
But the
even
screenwriters
back to
for the future, they might
Beast.
have foreseen what happened to the Swiss-Austrian professor Amadeus Dienach.
There's a vein here
This
soon.
man went through an experience that radically changed his life and accidentally pointed out possible paths about what lies ahead.
Combing our way through
Humanity. Paul suffered from a disease called lethargic encephalitis and remained in a coma for a year due to complications caused by the illness. However, it seems that during this period, his mind continued to work tirelessly, taking him to completely unexplored places and, most interestingly, people. It just so happened that the professor remembered the entire experience and documented it in a journal. The Swiss's writings were later published in the book Chronicles of the Future, the wonderful story of Paul Amadeus Dienach, edited by Aquilius Sirigus. In their considerations, Paul says that people from the future understood his medical condition perfectly, which they called conscious sleeping. They were talking to him about various historical events. They would be located between the 21st and 32nd centuries. Futurists like me, Andre Benjamin, will name these future inhabitants to make our understanding here in the video easier. They just didn't inform the professor about events related to his immediate future and that of humanity, for they feared it might disturb the Swiss or somehow alter the course of history. Oh, and just one more thing. When Paul went to the future, he traveled until he arrived in someone else's body. A man named Andrew Northman.
Was he the...
Another person. This guy here, the so-called Andrew Northman, who hosts the consciousness of Paul Dienach, apparently had a near-death experience in the year 3906. He would have had a serious accident and been between life and death. A situation that would have led to the discovery of two bodies in coma at completely different times. I know this merging of consciousness seems a bit confused, but follow my line of thinking, okay? Andrew Northman woke up from a coma in 3906. He was very confused and his mind was no longer the same. When Andrew Northman woke up in 3906, Professor Dienach's consciousness took over the body, and therefore he did not recognize any of Andrew's relatives. He didn't even know what year it was. Through his diary, Professor Dienach revealed that Andrew's relatives noticed something strange was happening. They were aware that they were dealing with another consciousness trapped in the right body. Then, the family members began to recount everything that had happened from 1921 to 3906. And you should remember from history classes when we had a thing called a timeline that we used to visualize how a process was historically established. That's exactly what we're going to do now. To try to unravel everything Paul Dienach wrote about this theme in his diary, when he himself, woke up from the coma back in 1922, according to ancientculture.com, between the years 2000 and 2300, humanity is still expected to face issues like overpopulation, ecological destruction of the environment, economic inequalities, wrong monetary system, lack of adequate nutrition for everyone, and small local wars. This means that, according to this forecast, during this period, people
would still be living.
in this
rush the race to survive.
financial revival.
without time to search for one's inner self and spiritual development. Already in 2204, humanity would complete a major colonization on Mars, with more than 20 million people inhabiting the red planet. However, later on, in 2265, a natural disaster, people, what would make humanity give up on the idea of colonizing further? In 2309, due to accumulated and unresolved issues, Earth faces another big problem. a new world war. This conflict would cause much of civilization, as we know it today, cease to exist. Already in 2396, facing such upheavals, the final establishment of a global parliament in the land of the global union of nations, or the state, occurs. But this parliament wouldn't exactly be composed of politicians, but rather businessmen, scientists, economists, technologists, and humanitarian figures. Moreover, money, as we know it today, would no longer exist, and the planet's resources would be redistributed in such a cool way that there would be enough for everyone. And issues like environmental problems, hunger, and overpopulation would be solvable. And although there were adjustments in other fields still to be made, people's lives would be much easier, and they would work less throughout their lives. The calendar would also change, and the years would start to be counted again, with the year 2396 being the year. However, this global government would also be
a total
militarism, and national governments would continue to oppose it for a few more centuries. At that time, people had not yet developed what Diana calls planetary consciousness. This abundance would only come to fruition about 2 to 5 centuries later. However, even though there aren't economic inequalities like before, there are still distinctions in controlling the level of technology and property. People are spiritually weak and slow, which would lead to a peculiarity of darkness, which would last until the year 3405. However, in the year 3382, a remarkable phenomenon occurs in humanity, and people become extremely spiritualized, to the point of suddenly acquiring a new skill, which could be called hypervision or hyperintuition. This power would grant access to a great spiritual light or direct knowledge with immense creativity,
Good dodge.
which would indeed be the result of a kind of mutation in the brain, a human brain. Between the years 3400 and 4000, humanity would live a new golden age, after having endured the so-called vagina age for 1,000 long years.
Fills the cars.
Positions in the global government are no longer for scientists or technocrats, but for universal creators. These folks would simultaneously embody the traits and skills of a philosopher, artist, scientist, adept, mystic, and activist. Everything in society is free. Clothes, housing, food, transportation. There is no private property, and the only inequalities are of honor and reputation. Think. People no longer measure the success of their lives based on technological and material living standards. Material, but mainly regarding their emotional, mental, and spiritual development and self-improvement. Humans would work for just 2 years in their entire life, between the ages of 17 and 19. The Earth's population would be less than 1 billion people, and we would have enough resources for everyone to live very well. Regarding laws, there would be only 3. First, people would work for just 2 years. Second, there would be birth control. And third, the regulation of free market distribution and transportation methods. What a trip! But before we start hypothesizing that the info in the diary is viable, it is important to remember that he was sick when he had this experience. Moreover, encephalitis lethargica affects the nervous system and, in some cases, can cause symptoms like dizziness, mental confusion, and delirium.
That, while the people were in a coma,
His mother had passed away, so when he woke up, much in his life was different. In fact, the year he spent unconscious changed. Completely over. Perhaps that's the reason why he shared in the diary all the changes that occurred in his life. And since he was ill, he traveled to Greece in the fall of 1922, hoping his health would improve. Throughout this time in Greece, Paul taught French and German to generate some income there. That's when he became a geography teacher and paparazzi, a student with whom Paul developed a strong friendship, to the point where the pupil described him as a very cautious and very modest man who used to emphasize the details. In fact, it was a paparazzi who told the world a bit of his teacher's history. According to him, Dienach was born in a suburb of Zurich and spent his teenage years in a village near the big Swiss city. After that, he decided to study everything he enjoyed reading, especially stories of the cultures and classical philology. Paul Dienach eventually died of tuberculosis in Athens, Greece, likely during the first quarter of 2020, from 1924. There's another theory that says he actually died on his way back to his homeland. Well, folks, the fact is that before passing away, either entrusted part of his life and soul to paparazzi, or rather, his so precious diary. In fact, he left the paparazzi a book that would help him improve his German, translating the pages from German to Greek. And the paparazzi did as requested. Initially, he believed Dienach had written a romance, but as he progressed with the translations, he soon realized that the notes were, in fact, his diary, which contained details of his trip to the future. And interestingly, Dienach didn't talk to anyone about his experience because he thought he would be considered crazy. However, he wrote about what he had seen in the future, except, as they say around here,
see crazy
a
everyone.
bit, right?